Hello, and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and the author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking, set to be released on September 1st, 2022. The Outdoor Minimalist Podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. In this episode of Outdoor Minimalist, I'll be talking about the framework of outdoor minimalism, the 7 R's. If this is your first time tuning into the show, I recommend going back and listening to the first episode, What is Outdoor Minimalism? In that episode, I preface the definition of outdoor minimalism, which I'll define here, and is broken down into 2 distinct parts. 1, an individual striving to minimize their impact in their relationships with nature. 2, one who consumes thoughtfully and only what they need and leaves the wilderness better than they found it. From that definition, then, the 7 R's can be broken down into easy-to-follow reference categories within my book, and they serve as good reminders of how to pursue minimalism through the lens of an outdoor enthusiast. You can think of these as the essential framework or pieces that allow individuals to enact change through minimalist concepts. The 7 R's that I created for outdoor minimalism include reduce, refuse, rethink, repair, Rehome and Repurpose, which are grouped together, remove, and restore. Much like the 3 R's that you're likely familiar with, the 7 R's start with reduce. Each R plays a distinct role, and I'll be breaking them down into a few different episodes, starting with the first 3, reduce, refuse, and rethink. Before I jump into exactly what all 3 of those mean in the terms of outdoor minimalism, let's take a look at why reduction and a mindset shift around consumption are important in all areas of our lives, and how we've been taught to view them. For most of my life, I've been taught the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle. While all 3 of these things have been influential, recycling has always seemed to be the forefront of society's sustainability approach. What's funny about this is when the 3 R's were designed and became a campaign, it's thought that they put the most important one first. Within the 7 R's of outdoor minimalism, reduce is the only one that is related to the original 3 R's. And I put it first because, like in the original 3, it is likely the most important. Now, to understand why recycling has been taught so strategically to us, instead of reducing our consumption, we need to know how the 3 R's came about in the first place. There's some debate about this topic, but from most of the sources I could find, it's thought that the practices of the 3 R's have been around for centuries. And in the pre-baby boomer generation, they'll likely remember that they needed to hoard and stockpile goods. They avoided using some materials and reduced their consumption in general, all to save resources during World War II. Then in the 1950s, we saw an economic boom of sorts, which led to an increase in waste, primarily single-use packaging waste. During this time, single-use items, disposable packaging, and convenience were huge selling points and being pushed onto the consumer from basically every angle. And everyone was buying into it. Despite this push, it didn't take very long for more earth-conscious consumers to become concerned with the increase of the amount of consumption and waste. Here's where the original 3 R's come into play. It wasn't until the very first Earth Day on April 22nd, 1970, that most people believe kind of spearheaded a lot of different environmental campaigns. As many of you may know, the first Earth Day event was a hit, and millions of people organized to raise awareness about the variety of environmental issues of the day. And each year, Earth Day has gained in popularity, making it a global affair. And around the same time, the U.S. federal government also formed the Environmental Protection Agency. As the EPA was formed, the government also passed something called the Resource Recovery Act in Congress. This was a bill created to shift federal and community focus to practices like recycling, resource recovery, and turning waste into energy. Now, this wasn't the only influential environmental law enacted during the 70s. There were several state and federal laws also passed, and most of them were to promote conservation and to raise awareness about environmental issues in general. And during the time period of the 70s where there was this big push for environmental awareness at a consumer and government level, the 3 Rs were thought to be born. And they became a profoundly popular framework and a mantra for American citizens and environmental education. The idea is to reduce your overall consumption. What you can't reduce, then you're intended to reuse. And what you could no longer reuse, you recycle, but you only recycle as a last resort. And so the 3 Rs of reduce, reuse, recycle shouldn't be a problem. The only problem is that the industries bought into it as well. One of the reasons that reduce has become somewhat under the radar in most of our environmental education is because it would impact the current economy. The consumer society that we live in would have a hard time keeping up if consumers are continually reducing their intake, and less money would be being spent on those consumer goods. This wouldn't be a very effective advertising campaign in the eyes of most companies. That's why manufacturers latched onto recycling as the original campaign and began to push the concept onto consumers as the underlying message of the 3R slogan. That way, they could continue to sell their single-use products and convince the consumer that it's okay, you can buy as much as you want, as long as you recycle. And now recycling has been pushed to the front of the environmental movement and seen as somewhat of a savior. I'll likely do an episode about recycling in general, especially in terms of outdoor products, because there's a lot to be said about the broken system, general misconceptions, and obvious miscommunication and greenwashing of materials, and how they can or cannot be recycled effectively. But let's not focus too much on that right now. All of that to say is that since reducing plays such a big role in setting the standard of environmentally friendly habits, and it always has, that's why I included it in the 7 Rs of Outdoor Minimalism. And while most companies do not want you to consume less, there are some companies out there that are on board for change. And one of them is within the outdoor industry. You maybe can guess it. It's Patagonia. Patagonia is one example of a forward-thinking company that puts workers and the environment before profit in most instances. They have a lot of different environmental campaigns, and one of them is their Common Threads initiative. Patagonia has run a few different campaigns to promote a general anti-consumer message by asking consumers to do something simple. Don't buy this jacket or don't buy this shirt. If you haven't seen this campaign before or the Common Threads initiative, I'll link to both of them in the description. And to some consumers, it might seem strange that a retail company would promote not purchasing their items, but if you haven't heard of the Common Threads initiative, then I'll just tell you that it was to encourage consumers to consume less and to provide alternatives to buying new. And I say this in those terms because as human beings, we have to acknowledge that we have an impact. This is part of the reason why I have some disagreement with the terminology of zero waste. I love the movement and everything it stands for, don't get me wrong, but the wording zero waste is somewhat confusing or even misleading. As humans, we are the primary source, if not the only source, of major pollution on Earth, and every one of us creates waste. The only thing we can really do is reduce or minimize the amount of waste or the general impact we have throughout our lifetime. This concept of reducing within the terms of outdoor minimalism then expands beyond consumerism and material goods alone. And it takes a look at reducing your impact while you're recreating. When reducing your impact on the environment, we often look to the leave no trace principles as people who love the outdoors. If you're unfamiliar with Leave No Trace, I'll link to their website in the description. But I highly recommend that if you are unfamiliar with the 7 principles, that you take the time to read through their website, what they stand for, and understand how to do all of those things and why they're important. Anyway, reducing your impact on the environment expands beyond Leave No Trace and the immediate damage that you can have on the environment, as well as expanding beyond the afterlife of a product. and its packaging. And what I mean by afterlife is that once you've consumed an item, that it will go somewhere and the packaging will go somewhere. And the afterlife of that product then is how it degrades in the landfill or the ocean or at a recycling center or it's composted, etc. Reducing is an attempt then at a consumer level to stop a product from ever reaching that afterlife or reaching an afterlife that fits into a circular economy, and to prevent more materials from entering the landfill or from ever being extracted in the first place. Now, the concept of reduction doesn't need to fall solely on the consumer, though. Companies and manufacturers can also implement waste reduction systems into their product manufacturing, transportation of products, product packaging, and in their life cycle assessments. The idea of reducing consumption has never been more important. And today we're starting to see the implications of our hyperconsumerism with climate change, a never-ending cycle of pollution, and seemingly endless environmental exploitation because of our linear production model. Because of this, reducing your waste can be the main thing we focus on when we turn to environmental movements like zero waste. But then, in our attempt to reduce waste, we can easily become overwhelmed with the sheer amount that is out of our control, leaving us feeling hopeless or as if individual change doesn't really matter at all. And some experts will agree that individual change doesn't really matter, but other ones will combat that and say that it does. And if this is a concern of yours as you enter any type of environmental advocacy or habit changes in your life, I encourage you to go take a listen to one of my favorite podcasts, How to Save a Planet. They have an episode that compares larger systemic changes to individual change to see which one has a larger impact. And that episode is titled, Is Your Carbon Footprint BS? I'll also link that in the description. So how you choose to reduce your impact on the environment will look much different than anyone else. There are general things that we can all be doing, especially as outdoor enthusiasts, such as only buying the things you need and prioritizing the gear you already own. And that's why within the 7 R's, I included refuse and rethink to follow reduce. Refusing is an easy way for consumers to essentially boycott products that they don't agree with or that they believe have a detrimental effect on the environment for whatever reason. 2 very common examples of this would be refusing to use plastic in any form and refusing to consume animal products. In both cases, we see at a consumer level a complete refusal to participate in an economy that contributes to the assigned detriment. So in the case of plastics, many environmentalists will refuse to use plastic bags or buy products in plastic containers, and they won't wear clothing like polyester because it sheds microfibers. But how they go about the level of refusal is somewhat up to them and their general accessibility. And since we can't necessarily refuse to have an impact on the environment completely, since we're living beings, refusal is a way to further build on simply reducing our impact. And how we get to reduction and refusal really is through the 3rd R, rethink. Now, this R can sometimes be the most challenging, but it can also maybe be one of the most influential because it requires the inaction of the behavior change we're striving to achieve. For instance, if you're working on reducing your impact by refusing to say you're trying to eat less beef because you recently learned it's one of the most environmentally damaging animal products, but you really love to pack beef jerky when you go hiking and backpacking. Now, if you truly want to reduce your impact on the environment through the refusal of consuming beef, then begins the process of rethinking. In this specific instance, it'll likely take some research and finding a good replacement snack that you like that's equally as salty and satisfying. But that likely won't happen right away. It can take some time and it can take some trial and error. For a lot of people, that type of rethinking can be kind of a big switch and takes an effort in their life that they may not necessarily be ready. So what you choose to rethink has to be what you're ready to rethink. And another example of rethinking that is maybe more immediate is when you're on social media or anywhere on the internet really, and say your favorite outdoor brand is releasing a new seasonal item, or you come across some rad gear review of the best, rain jackets of 2021. This creates a really tempting venture down this rabbit hole that is gear on the internet. But this can often also lead to impulse buys of things you don't necessarily need. So here, in both of these instances, we have to implement the ability to rethink our needs and to redirect our attention and understand the full implications of our consumption. Now, I'm definitely not a perfect environmentalist, and I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to be zero waste. But rethinking consumption alone is an effective way that I'm making positive changes because I've started to think about every step of the production process, not just what happens after I buy it. Okay, let's be real though, that sounds extremely exhausting to do, but the less that you buy and the more time that you devote to product research, the less exhausting it becomes. And I'm not saying that you have to do it for every single thing that you buy. Start small. Start with one item, say a big purchase that you had. Maybe it is a new puffy jacket or a new bike for your daughter. Start with those big purchases and start to do your product research there and start to rethink where you'd usually go and buy something like that. So all in all, rethinking can give you a new sense of appreciation for products when you have the awareness of everything that went into it to get it to your door. It can make you reconsider an item in your shopping cart online when you found out that it's made from an unethical sourcing or that they have worker exploitation. Rethinking gives you a better understanding of how to use your money and what you choose to invest in through the products you buy. Taking the time to research any item that you buy is a good way to invest your money into ways that cut back consumption and to find high quality products that last way longer. Rethinking your purchasing habits is one thing, but rethinking the implications of what you purchase and every step it takes to get to you is another. It takes time to get to a spot where you can confidently purchase anything, and I'm not quite there yet. But as I begin to shift my mindset and continue to train my brain to reconsider and reevaluate my purchases, I gain a deeper respect and understanding of the process of production as a whole. By reducing your consumption and only buying what you need, you're becoming a part of the solution. And you're also becoming a part of the solution by refusing to consume products that foster exploitation, pollution, and environmental destruction. By rethinking your daily habits and your purchases, you can be a part of the solution. Reduce, refuse, and rethink are just the first 3 parts of the 7 R's of outdoor minimalism. In future episodes, I'll be discussing the last of the 7 R's and how they relate to outdoor minimalism and consumerism as a whole. The remaining R's include repair, rehome and repurpose, remove, and restore. I'll likely be breaking these ones down into individual episodes. That way I can interview industry experts regarding how to do this on a larger scale, while also encouraging consumers to take accountability for their impact. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can now find me on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book. Follow there for updates, educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.